Hey, welcome back to the podcast. We're here to talk about marketing. We're here to talk about strategic storytelling. And Laura Nespoli is here from meshinmovement.com to set us straight, to tell us what we need to do, what we're missing out on, what mistakes we're making. She is the founder of the storytelling consulting firm Meshin Movement. And Laura has spent the past 5 years helping startups, founders, and professionals articulate their purpose and brand stories. And so we're going to find out about storytelling and the magicness of it, but also how you to make money. So Laura, glad to be speaking with you.
Great to be here. Thank you, Robert.
Very welcome. And so I did my best to hype up you for the audience, introduce you with your bio, but in your own words, what are you up to? What's your current focus and passion?
So I am a strategic storyteller, and the passion there is all about articulating meaning. What is the core expression of a brand's purpose or a product story that can connect most meaningfully with an audience? And that's what I love to do.
Well, let's get into it. Connecting meaningfully with an audience. It sounds to me like a process that requires a lot of deep thinking and simplifying and distilling down the words. And sometimes you hear some of this advice about like talk to lots of your customers and look at the commonalities and think about your cause, the people you're helping, think about the beginning, middle, and an end. So like, what's your approach to storytelling? If someone says, oh my gosh, storytelling sounds great, I need to apply it more in my business, what would you tell them?
Okay. It's a great question. So the way that I approach storytelling, I often say the approach is always the same and the approach is always different. There's some core foundational aspects to uncovering the story and in the discovery process, what you need to gather as the building blocks. But then how you piece them together often differs depending on the type of story that you need to tell. But those building blocks essentially are 4 C's, the category or context for the story. What's true about the world or the space that we're in that we can articulate in a way that we can all agree. Where's our starting point? And then once we have the right context set, what is our customers? What are their needs? What are their pain points? What would motivate them? What are their key barriers? Once we uncover that vision of the customer, we look at what are the competitors doing? Are they leaving white space? Are they connecting with the customer? Is everyone saying one thing and leaving this unmet need untouched in the space? So we've got category, customer, competitive, and then our company. What's our product story? What's our brand? What are we all about? And so with those 4 C's, you can really establish a really great resonant story that's true about the world we're living in, that we're operating in. It connects meaningfully with your audience in a way that's distinctive and differentiated, and it really sets us up and is authentic to what we offer and provide as a brand.
I love it. And especially that differentiation aspect of like, being newsworthy, speaking up about something that makes someone perk up. And I like how you put it as far as the white space, like what are the competitors leaving out? And sometimes they call that like the blue ocean strategy, right? Like you say, well, what's all this new open space where everyone just like maybe they don't know to go here, they don't know how to make the messaging this way. And then we are the ones that say, hey, we're better, or we're simpler, or we're faster. And so you've worked with all these cool companies, done all these great things. Do you have a fun story to share with us to kind of experience the magic of you in action, to kind of see how you make the storytelling come alive?
Yeah. So, this is the interesting part. My gift is meaning and story and connecting in this way. So, the 4 C's, it's a basic strategic process. It's something that any company could use. But I think it's the right person and listening and hearing the unsaid and seeing the unseen and kind of operating in that negative space between things that are stated. That really is the sweet spot of where I shine. So it's pretty basic in terms of, if a professional individual or a founder comes to me, we can do a story in a very basic way using those 4 C's, where it consists of a handful of one-on-one interviews. And it's just the questions I ask and what I uncover. I do some desk research, and I find interesting threads, interesting connecting points between that information to find, a little bit of tension, a little bit of, an insightful way of thinking about something not so obvious maybe. Or sometimes, you know what? If it has to be a very clear and obvious story to make it easier for a customer to buy, then we go that way. And I think that's where the strategic part comes in. But it can also scale up. I do this work. I'm, in addition to running my own storytelling consultancy, I work for a marketing firm, and we do storytelling work for some of the world's biggest technology brands, Fortune 100 companies. And I approach it with the 4 C's, but sometimes it takes 6 weeks and 15 stakeholders and aligning different opinions. And that's where the beauty of really hearing between the lines, when you've got a number of different stakeholders and everyone's got their own idea of what they want that story to be. And you need someone who can kind of like open the lens and broaden the aperture. I have one client who also did this work, but they hired me to help them articulate their purpose. And they said, you can't read the label from inside the jar. So having that perspective of someone outside the group, especially when you have a lot of different stakeholders in a company who have their hands in what that story needs to be, it's super helpful to have this, this support and someone who can kind of hear what's not being said and put all those connections together.
I love it. Connecting the dots, figuring out the tension, and like you said, sometimes spending like the many weeks long process of figuring out the magic, the secret sauce. And I'm always thinking about the idea of like there's kind of like your starting point where there's like chaos, not if there's a problem, you need something to be fixed, and then there's like the ending of where like, cool, I got my brand figured out, right? I'm Harley Davidson or I'm Apple. I've got like my clear message, and that in between part, there's a lot of like difficulty, isn't there? It's like you think about like if you're like practicing for like a sport or music or dance, there's like a lot of like non-fun happening, right? In that kind of middle space of like kind of bashing your head against the wall, figuring out the ideas. And so how do you get through it? Because it seems like it's easy to like give up or just kind of get more frustrated than you were when you started. So how do you like break through all the middleness of brainstorming?
That's a good question. And it makes me think of a saying that I often tell my clients: it's always messy until it isn't. You're right. It starts super messy. There's a lot of information. The way that I get to that endpoint is a narrowing process. I always think like if you start broad in terms of the information you're uncovering in a discovery process, you get to some really interesting findings, and those become the first set of building blocks. And you take that back to stakeholders or the founders or whomever your decision party is, and you decide together what's really interesting here from a findings perspective. What are those findings that are most pertinent to us? And we come to agreement and we stack hands. And then we move forward with those findings in particular. And we look at the relationship between those findings. Again, these are based on the 4 C's. So you're looking for interesting ways of pulling the story together, the context, the customer, the opportunity to either stand apart or align with your category, and what's true about your brand. And again, once we've kind of like removed all the things that feel certainly true, but maybe not as pertinent and clear as what we need to articulate, we've got the core set of findings. Then we look at different ways of pulling them together. And I call these territories or threads, interesting threads that we can follow. And so it's kind of like the first step in choosing the direction of a narrative or a story. Again, it's just giving options, because when you have all that information, there's a lot of different ways it can come together. There's a lot of different strategic angles to take. You can dial certain elements of those findings up depending on what kind of story you're trying to tell. If you're in a highly commoditized category and, the really technology, for instance, if your technology is really similar to all your competitors' technology, but you want to connect with a certain aspect of a customer need that no one else is talking about, you lean into that customer aspect. There's like different elements you can really dial up depending on where you are in your landscape. And that's what those territories allow you to do. So again, it's this narrowing process. Then you all decide together, you know what, this territory one that really leans into the competitive distinction, that's really rich territory for us. And then we move forward with that. So chaos, I think, is best tackled with organization, but it doesn't come immediately. Take it in bits and pieces. It's like when I tell my kids to clean their room, start with the books, put all the book, like one
Right.
thing at a time, and it just kind of makes the mess kind of shrink down into a more manageable size.
I like it. That's good problem solving in general, right? If the task is too big, figure out, well, what can I solve now? And it doesn't even necessarily need to be the most urgent or the biggest problem. Let me just like solve something. That way I'm sort of having progress. I'm kind of on the right track. And you're saying that so sometimes there's this problem of being a commodity, being like so many other existing solutions. And you say, okay, well, how can we differentiate? And when you mention that, what comes to mind is there's all these like podcasting platforms, right? Like you and me right now, we're on Riverside, and there's like StreamYard, and they lean more into like the live streaming, and there's Zoom, and they're more like, well, we're like meetings in general. And so I think it's kind of a fun just topic to think about of like sometimes you get a client and they're in just like this really dull, boring niche, right? Or this really boring software, but you have to go and like figure out, well, what's exciting and what like turns on the customers. And so you mentioned earlier about sometimes being like stuck for weeks. And so was there a situation like that where you just were like, oh my gosh, how do I make this exciting? How do I make this like a not a commodity? Have you ever been like so stuck for weeks on this?
I do get stuck. I think the way to talk about this, because what you're talking about brings me to a challenge I come across quite often in my work, where I do brand storytelling, purpose storytelling, but also product storytelling. And I think one of the places that people often get stuck is what level does our story need to hit at? Is it brand? And I think brand is when you have a highly commoditized product. If you're just talking about the nuts and bolts of the product itself, or technology in general, a lot of people say, well, our technology makes things really efficient. Every technology makes things efficient. That's what technology is for. And so you want to get like more into like, what is our distinction? What's our point of view? Like, what can we offer that's different? And that's when you kind of take it to a little bit higher level, more at a brand level. And the brand is more of an emotional connection with the customer. What do we stand for? What kind of people do we serve? And does our customers see themselves in our brand? And I think that place between brand versus product is a very easy place for stakeholders to get stuck in. And if your audience is thinking about like whether they're the CEO or head of sales or head of product, each one of those figures within the decision making process has a distinct need for what they need their marketing story to do for them. And coming to a place where everyone feels comfortable and feels like the story can serve them is difficult. And I think we talked about those building blocks, right? We talked about the discovery and getting to some core elements and finding some insights, and then taking the distinct territories, and you decide, okay, this is the path we're going to go down with our narrative. We often get stuck at that, like, here's the path we're going to go down. And then once we choose that path, the story needs to come to life in so many ways. It'll resonate differently at an awareness level, advertising, marketing place than it will on the website or in B2B one-to-one sales materials. And I think it's often in that place where it's like still a little bit theoretical. Here's the general direction of our story. And no one can come to agreement because we have some people who are thinking, I need this to be really hardworking in a pitch deck. And other people who are thinking, well, it needs to be more emotional, more anthemic. It needs to resonate for a big advertising campaign. And I think we need to show them that it's going to come to life in various ways. And it's all going to come from the same core story, but live distinctly at each one of those stages. So often it's just a matter of showing them what the story or a key message might look like at various places along a decision journey. Show them it's one story, but over here it's going to sound a little bit more emotionally led and connect with some key motivations. And then further along in the funnel, it's probably going to connect more with like helping them overcome some barriers to the decision and conversion. And it might be a little bit more tactical, and it might be more product activation storytelling. And that one cohesive story can serve all parts of that. So it's kind of like giving them a taste of what's in the future, just as you're kind of choosing that pathway and helping them move along through that stakeholder decision-making process, which is often charged and difficult.
For sure. And I like that thought process because you think a lot about, I don't know why the idea of like the five levels of awareness, I don't know why it's so helpful, right? Like, and why is it five, right? Like if it was like 3 or 10, I feel like it wouldn't help me mentally as much as being like, okay, here's what my SaaS does. And then there's like, if I think in like, okay, there's like five levels and probably like the core three are like what I really want, but like there's someone that like really is at like that beginner level and someone's really at like the I just need this problem solved. And like you're mentioning this and like Adobe comes to mind, right? If I Google search like how do we do something like so specific in Photoshop, for some reason Adobe ranks for it, right? And I say like how do I like do like a gradient brush fill, and I end up on like their exact blog post and they say go here, use this software, click on that, and then they have like 2 or 3 levels of call to action depending on like log in here, get this software, here's how to do this. And it's like it's so helpful. And then on the other hand, I'm sometimes like, okay, well, do I need to use like Adobe like Premiere for this or some other tool? So like that's what comes to mind as far as like these levels of awareness. And like some people are like, hey, I'm the one doing the work, I'm the one delegating the work, I'm the one figuring out the plan. It's so cool to think about like these different kind of these tiers, right? These hierarchies. And so I love hearing about your process, but as far as like people messing up storytelling, I'm sure it happens a lot, right? You being so drilled deep into some of this, it must drive you crazy. So has any example come to mind as far as like some brand company you've seen like getting their storytelling wrong?
I can't, it's hard to think of a very specific example. I will as we chat. I think the biggest thing is people talk too much about themselves. The importance of storytelling in marketing. Story is the way that we as human beings relate to one another. Story is a way that we can see ourselves in other people's ideas. It's the way that we absorb information that's really hard to understand. Story is so effective for marketing for all of those reasons and more. It really creates a stronger connection between us and a product, and it helps us see why that product might help us in our lives. It might help us overcome challenges. For people that, or for brands that really lean into marketing story that's strictly about themselves and kind of ignores the customer pain points, the customer's reality, or isn't looking at their competitive space and thinking, how can we be different? I think if you take a more myopic view and just think about yourself and you're not looking at the broader landscape or who you're trying to connect with, I think you miss an opportunity to be more authentic, be more real for the customer. It's really about solving a problem for them. And I think that's where, brands can sometimes go wrong. They're not thinking holistically enough.
And that's why they need someone like you to kind of get the right perspective in place, right? And so I like how you're presenting this. How sometimes we always wonder, okay, well, like, what's the point of a story? Is it like unnecessarily adding fluff or complexity? But you're saying that sometimes there are these like ideas, concepts, paths, whatever that are just like it's too much to comprehend. But you simplify it in terms of a story, and that can be good or bad, right? Sometimes we have a bad habit or a good habit because our story is, hey, I get home from work, I go and I pet the dog, I go and I sit down, and sometimes like a story kind of just like reinforces or tells us that what we're doing is what we should be doing. And so perhaps we can steer a new story if someone says, hey, well, you need to be using like this AI tool or this Adobe product or this piece of software. Now beforehand used to have this this chaos in your business, right? Used to use spreadsheets, used to use pencil and paper, use a software instead. Now here's a story where you can kind of see yourself dropped in here. And you're saying that when companies maybe apply a story, maybe it's like laziness, or maybe they just like don't have enough creativity or haven't thought it through enough, but like they need to tell these stories that have empathy and that show a benefit to someone else using our product, so that way it's about them, it's not about us. And so as far as some of these ideas we're touching on as far as storytelling, I just met you right before we hit record, right? I don't know you in and out so much, but as far as what people need to know about copywriting, messaging, storytelling, all this stuff, is there a missing hidden question in our conversation that you wish I would ask you? I just don't know how to ask you.
Oh boy. We covered why storytelling matters. We covered the elements of a strong story. We covered the barriers. I think we got a lot of range here. I think, maybe a question people would be asking themselves, how do I do this? Like, can anyone just do this for themselves? Um, so that would be it. Like, can we just use the tools and go ahead and craft our story? And I would say, so I'm asking the question and now I'm going to answer it.
Okay.
um, I would say you can, but I think having an unbiased perspective is really helpful, because I think it's hard sometimes to see the forest through the trees when you're the stakeholder team, and having an outside perspective can often kind of help you foray into the unknown. Sometimes you don't even know what you don't know as a brand. And that's where I think um, looking for what you don't see is where you kind of have that broader lens, open up the aperture, maybe see different opportunities, different angles, and different ways in. Um, don't be afraid to get curious and admit you might not know the most beneficial story. Go in with an open mind and curiosity.
I love it. The negative space, right? It's the same reason why you go to an accountant who doesn't know your business every day. The same reason why you go to a therapist, marriage counselor. They're like some outside, unbiased, fresh perspective. And I remember when I was a kid and we learned about like the stars in the sky, and they said, hey, there's all these stars, but there's also like the constellations. There's the stuff you don't see. There's the void. And that's, and especially in storytelling, that's always a fun idea, right? Is what is not being said, or what your competitors have not thought of, or like a use for this product that is just untapped. Like that is some exciting stuff. And so as far as getting people excited, energized about contacting you and meshinmovement.com about getting their storytelling figured out, what's the so-called sales pitch? Like, why should someone reach out, contact you to help solve some business problems?
Well, if you're struggling to articulate your story, that's my purpose. I inspire people, unite people around a core meaning, and rally teams for movement through story. So that's rallying your internal team, getting everyone in alignment and agreement, but also rallying your customers to connect with your product. So those are some key pain points I think that people struggle with as they're developing their story. How do we internally come to consensus, and then how do we make it matter for our outside world? And that is just what I exist to do, is my passion. So happy to do it. And this is work that I do for founders and companies, but it's also work I do for professionals. More and more having a professional story where you've got a clearly stated, I believe this to be true about the space I'm in, and therefore I exist to do this with my work. And I do that by doing these things in this way that's unique, so that I have this impact for my company and my clients. That clearly articulated story is super helpful for people out in the professional space.
I agree. Personal brand, they call it, right? That clearly articulated story. And I have to admit, like, I didn't really see the value in it until like a bunch of years ago. I met a guy in a podcast who, like, his mission was to eliminate plastics out of the ocean. And I was like, that's like a huge, crazy goal. But then it gets me to perk up, and it gets other people to kind of like latch on to this guy's mission. So I can see the value in it, and I can see how it's easy to go wrong in a number of ways. And especially like you mentioned, that sort of buy-in component, right? Like in your internal team, you have to have everyone on board with that story, and then you kind of expand it externally and make sure that it's something that the customers want as well. And so it's a big, huge problem to solve. And it's really abstract. And if you're not someone that thinks about this all the time, it can hurt your brain cells. And that's why you need someone like Laura Nespoli from meshinmovement.com to figure out some of this branding, the storytelling. And so when someone goes to meshinmovement.com, Laura, like what will they see and what would you like them to do as far as reaching out to you?
Yeah, so on my website at Meshin, you'll see the work that I do, whether I do this for teams, individuals, companies, and I also do storytelling work for community impact organizations and projects. I also speak about the power of story to help us as individuals, teams, and leaders. Storytelling to help us identify strength in ourselves. So I'm also a public speaker. And so you'll get the details of everything I do at the website, and contact information is there as well. And follow me along on the channels on LinkedIn or Instagram, and you'll see what I'm up to with storytelling.
All right. So that is last name Nespoli. That's Laura Nespoli, meshinmovement.com. And you're so right, Laura, that this whole idea of storytelling, like it's you always hear about how like the best stories get passed down through the generations, the families, the religions. It's what really sticks with us. You know, facts and figures, features and benefits, that's all great to engage that analytical mind, but to really make things stick, we need storytelling in our business. And some of these companies, brands where we buy their products again and again, we don't even think about it because their story has stuck in us so much, right? You
Yeah.
have the Disneys and the Hershey's and all of that. And so as people are heading to meshinmovement.com, it's time to stump you a little bit, put you on the spot. I like to ask my guests near the end here about a fun quote or lesson that has served them at some point in their journey that they can pass on to us. So I realized it's, completely off the beaten path, but as far as a quote or lesson that has helped you that you can tell us about, does anything come to mind?
Absolutely. I think I've already mentioned it. It is core advice for me. Look beyond what's visible to see what's possible. And I think that saying, when a boss said that to me once, it really had me kind of stop and realize like the necessary curiosity to push your boundaries, to expand your thinking, to see what's not seen, to look into the negative space. You have to look beyond what's visible to see what's possible. So I love that. It encourages the curiosity that's necessary for growth, expansion, development, and foraying into that somewhat tense or contentious space between stakeholders. You have to be willing to explore the unknown a little bit to make really significant progress. So that's what I leave you with.
And that's beautiful, right? There's what exists in the physical world, that's what you see, but there's also what's possible that's accomplished through your imagination. So to get that imagination working for you, to figure out that brand messaging and so much more, go to MESHIN movement.com. That's meshinmovement.com. Laura Nespoli, wonderful speaking with you about some of these big marketing ideas and storytelling. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Robert. I appreciate the space and the time.
All right, super cool.